The stomach is similar to the heart in that it has its own pacemaker. And this pacemaker stimulates it to contract. And your stomach contracts every 15 seconds, so 4 times a minute. This rate is set, so this 15 seconds doesn't change. But also like the heart, the stomach can be influenced by the autonomic nervous system. Remember, the autonomic nervous system has 2 divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Think back about the nicknames for those. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. So it's going to be the parasympathetic that's going to influence the stomach. And you won't change that 15 seconds, but you can change the force of contraction and the amount of gastric juice produced. And we call that increased motility. So parasympathetic increases motility, which means the force and the amount of gastric juice produced. So let's go through and look at 3 phases of the stomach. I'm going to use red and green here because 2 of them stimulate the stomach and 1 of them inhibits the stomach. So we'll begin with the cephalic phase. I'm going to show you a little video clip here to experience a cephalic phase. So, are you hungry now after watching that clip? Cephalic is when you see, smell, or think about food. You can actually make yourself hungry with these stimuli. So, seeing, smelling, or thinking about food will cause your brainstem to use the vagus nerve. So, this is the vagus. And it will secrete acetylcholine onto your stomach. Hopefully you remember this. We've talked about the vagus before, secreting acetylcholine. Okay, so ACH is something we've had before. It's what stimulates skeletal muscles to contract. It slows down the heart, and it increases motility of the stomach. So acetylcholine is stimulatory to the stomach. This might be when you hear your stomach growl. So if you're thinking about food and you're seeing food and you're getting hungry, you might hear that growling. That growl of your stomach is the forceful contractions because it's contracting harder now. And you also have more gastric juice. So those forceful contractions slosh that gastric juice around. And that's what you hear is your stomach growling. So this is in green because it's stimulating your stomach. It's making your stomach work harder. Next is the gastric phase. This starts once food enters the stomach. So if the cephalic phase was successful, it gets you to eat. So now you have food enters the stomach. Two things happen now. Notice here we have this sensory neuron going back this way. So one thing that happens is the stomach sends sensory nerve signals back to the brainstem. This would be part of that visceral sensory you learned in chapter 12. And this causes the brainstem to increase the vagal stimulation. So you're going to get more acetylcholine secreted onto the stomach. And this will increase the motility. The second thing that happens, remember we learned about G cells and gastrin? So down here, we have these arrows. These are showing gastrin. The G cells will secrete gastrin, and it goes into the blood, circulates through the body, comes back, and stimulates the stomach. So now, in the gastric phase, the stomach is really going. It has lots of acetylcholine, and it has gastrin stimulating it. So you're getting a lot of gastric juice, some very forceful contractions. Then it's time to start slowing it down. So the third phase is intestinal. As the stomach contracts, it pushes food through that pylorus. So remember, the pylorus is where the stomach connects to the small intestine. And that first part of the small intestine is the duodenum. There's a sphincter here that holds the pylorus closed. But every time the stomach contracts, that every 15 seconds, it pushes that sphincter open. And that allows about a tablespoon of chyme to pass through into the intestine. Now, a tablespoon is not very much at all. Your intestine purposely wants slow entry of the chyme. The intestine needs time to thoroughly digest the food. So it wants just little bits of chyme at a time. So it's going to get some chyme every 15 seconds. The harder the stomach is contracting, the more chyme it will push through. So your intestine wants to calm the stomach down and get that chyme, get those contractions to be less forceful so not too much chyme is pushed through. So now you need to calm the contractions. So now the small intestine is going to counteract everything that happened in the gastric phase. So you can see here we're going to inhibit gastrin, and we're going to inhibit vagal stimulation. And the intestine accomplishes this with two hormones of its own, CCK and secretin. So once chyme starts flowing through into the intestine, it wants to calm the stomach down so that it doesn't get too much chyme flowing through. So it secretes CCK and secretin. They inhibit the gastrin and the vagal stimulation, and you lose that stimulation of the stomach, and it still contracts every 15 seconds, but with less force.